Hello everyone, sorry for the long wait. I hope you don't mind that this time I'm combining two episodes into one review, but I feel like it's fitting because episode 5 and 6 mostly dealt with the introduction of our third party member, Stark, so I think I will start this discussion specifically with him. I bet that most of you are here because of my One Piece reviews, and if that's the case, then you probably already know that I have a soft spot for characters like Stark, someone who's a coward and yet still fights, still does the right thing. When we first saw Stark, he was bluffing and pretending to be confident, and my favorite part about that was how long this setup was before the illusion was broken. It's not a new thing, it's a pretty common trope, but what usually happens in other stories is that a legend is built around a character through other characters, and it's broken the second we meet them, or a couple of shots later at best. But with Stark, that joke wasn't rushed at all, to the point where you could almost believe no punchline was coming. So I really like how Frieren did a pretty tropey character introduction scene, but still put a unique spin on that. But now let's get to the meat of Stark's character and also his relationship with Aizen. Stark is a coward, someone who was the only one who ran away from his hometown when it got attacked by demons. And I got chills when Aizen was explaining that and then added, "He's like me." I want to point out that when he said that, we were shown the graves of his parents again, so it probably means that his hometown also must have been attacked when he was younger and he lost his parents in that attack, and he survived because he ran. And that's what connects Aizen and Stark. They both were cowards, they both ran away, they both probably saw their loved ones die while they did nothing, and once you experience something horrifying like this, once you know what that's like, then you get the motivation, the push to make sure that something like this never happens again. And that's why it's precisely fear and being a coward that makes both Aizen and Stark such great warriors. When this village that our party visited was attacked 3 years ago, Stark jumped in front of a dragon despite being scared to the point he couldn't even move, because that's the opposite of what he did when his own hometown was attacked, and he will forever live with that regret. I love this parallel that was created without having to even show it on screen. Another cool parallel was that the dragon had the same color palette as Stark. So while on a physical level, Stark was fighting a dragon, but you can say that symbolically, Stark was fighting his own inner demons. He was conquering his own fear, so it was a great choice to pick red. Another great thing was how, after being hit, Stark ran away from Aizen, just like he tends to run away from all his problems, but that's okay because in the end, he still stepped on the path that would allow him to become a great warrior and a pupil that Aizen can be proud of. It just happened a little bit later and needed a little bit extra help. The point is that some people can do amazing things. They just don't see that by themselves, and sometimes they need a little extra outside push. In Stark's case, Aizen asked Frieren to take him and explain his situation. Then Frieren tricked Stark with the whole dragon thing. And even Frieren contributed by telling her own story about her first battle against a monster. All this sends a beautiful message, but even if we look at this from a storytelling perspective, then it's the whole point of having a group of characters instead of a singular, overpowered, and boring protagonist. Everyone in our group has their strengths and weaknesses, and they all need each other to fill what they lack and also to grow. I also want to point out that it seems like Frieren specifically sent Fern to talk to Stark at the end of episode 5 because she knew that they could bond and that Fern could help Stark make up his mind. I feel like it was another thing meant to show that Frieren knows her friends and understands people better than she might think, just like when she gifted Fern that butterfly hair ornament. It's also funny how Frieren went from no apprentices policy to taking on two, and she even suggested to add Stark to their group first. Sure, technically only Fern is her direct apprentice, but Stark is still another human companion. I believe it's because Frieren is having fun and starting to appreciate traveling together instead of always being alone. It's exactly what Eisen told her at the beginning of episode 5, that 1/100th changed you. And while I'm still on this scene, I want to highlight the montage that followed this line. It's so cool because usually we get montages like this at the end of a story, but with Frieren, we're getting it in episode 5. So they once again reminded us that this is called Beyond Journey's End, that this is a story about what happens after a story, and I continue loving this concept. I feel like Frieren, despite the fantasy setting, is a very realistic story that touches on many delicate real-life human experiences, so it's great how even the main premise itself reflects that. In real life, there is no end of a season or a show finale. Your story continues until you draw your last breath, and it's a question of what will you choose to do with that time? What sort of adventure will you choose to have? And I love how Frieren's story portrays it so beautifully. But going back to Stark and Eisen, I adore their relationship. There was a fun detail in episode 5 when Frieren explained that she collects spells because Himmel praised her. Stark repeated those words, "Praised you, huh?" as he touched his scar given to him by Eisen. It's another parallel because in a way Stark also joined Frieren and Fern because of how someone else changed his life, because he wants to tell Eisen about his adventures. Another great thing is how Stark later said that Eisen never praised him, and yet you can still see clearly how Stark loves Eisen and knows that Eisen loves him. The reason why I love this detail is because love and affection is more than just about the words. Stark didn't get and didn't need any superficial praise from Eisen to feel his love and want to repay him somehow. And going back to that scar and the lack of praise, in a very twisted, roundabout way, that scar is praise, because the reason why Eisen hit Stark was instinctual fear of Stark's strength. I really hope that this scar isn't forgotten and that at some point down the line, Stark gets to see a different meaning behind that mark, how it shows not Eisen's disappointment, but his pride. And sure, I don't exactly support violence, but the whole point of fictional stories is that they aren't real life. Instead, they are symbolic reflections of real life. So I believe that the whole hitting thing should also be evaluated through that symbolic lens. But now let's go back to the beginning of episode 5 and discuss the Phantoms of the Dead plotline. This one was pretty brutal emotionally. It's a scary concept that someone can read your memories and then use them against you. But there were a few interesting details that stood out to me during this whole part. First, why was Frieren apparently used to seeing her master beg for her life? It sounds very dramatic, but if I had to bet, then I think it's probably something really silly. Flamme, from the few glimpses that we saw of her, looked very spirited, so I wouldn't be surprised if her begging for her life is just synonymous to her being dramatic for no real reason. I would be genuinely surprised if reality was as dramatic as Frieren made it sound. Next is that I loved how Frieren comforted Fern by saying, "Let's go see the real Heiter now." She's kind in general, but I think that in that moment she was especially sympathetic because Frieren had to face her own phantom of Himmel. And on that note, I had a very sad thought. If Frieren is going to Orioli to see Himmel and Fern is going there to see Heiter, then it probably means that at some point Stark might want to go there to see Eisen. In episode 6, we had the whole conversation about how Stark wants to go on this adventure so that he can tell Eisen all about it. But I'm afraid that this might happen only in Orioli and not after he returns. I feel like Eisen had quite a few death flags even in these first 6 episodes. So while I'm hoping for the best, I'm preparing myself for the worst. The last detail about Phantoms of the Dead that I want to discuss is the fact that Frieren saw Himmel, and more specifically, what she imagined Himmel would say in that situation. The thing is that maybe it's not even what he would actually say, but that image was created from Frieren's memories and what kind of person she knew. It was how Frieren perceived Himmel, and that made me think about Himmel in general and why I, as an audience member, already love him even if I saw very little of him. And I believe the answer is because we always see Himmel through Frieren's eyes. His image we have is colored by her perception. And I already said it in my previous reviews how I believe that Frieren loved Himmel, and it doesn't even matter what kind of love that was, so therefore the audience also loves Himmel. To be fair, in episode 6 we also had an example of Himmel seen through Eisen's eyes, but for the most part we see him through Frieren's memories. And besides, Eisen also saw Himmel in a very positive light because he also obviously loved his friend. And on that topic, judging by the flashback, Eisen, just like Frieren, is also someone who was changed a lot by his mere 10 years adventure. I just love the idea how instead of changing the events, these characters changed the framing of those events. Something that Eisen used to see as a waste of time is now a ridiculous and fun adventure. This way of thinking is very inspiring and something that everyone can apply in real life too. Next, I want to talk about a semi-related topic, and it's about memories in general. I love how so much of this story is told through memories, and I want to emphasize that it's not just flashbacks, but specifically memories that are always triggered by the current events. I feel like memories in Frieren isn't just a storytelling device, but they become a theme in itself, so I love how they're doing that. And that's kind of all I have about the major things in these 2 episodes, so now let's move on to a few smaller details. First, as always, the animation was stunning. The art of Frieren was already absolutely beautiful, and so was magic animation. But episode 6 showcased that they can also do incredible action sequences, because That fight against the dragon was simply incredible. I also want to highlight one easy to overlook but amazing detail, and it was the moment when the dragon's pupils dilated in fear right before it got defeated. That's such a cool detail to include because, yeah, human and animal pupils do dilate when we are scared, and that poor dragon was certainly scared of Stark in that moment. I feel like to me, that moment was much more powerful in conveying Stark's strength than, for example, Aizen explicitly stating how he was scared of Stark when he hit him. But that's a personal preference. I'm just someone who usually enjoys small details in stories more than the big scenes. And while I'm on the topic of animation and small details, I'm amazed by how often this show adds all these little extra animation moments. Like when Frieren nearly dropped her stuff while opening the door, or how she fixed her hair after jumping on the rocks over a river. Things like these don't necessarily add anything to the plot, but they absolutely enhance the general vibe and the magical feeling of the world, so I appreciate just the pure presentation of the story even before the plot or the themes. Another great general thing is humor. Both episodes had plenty of small hilarious moments. For example, how Fern was holding onto a tree because she didn't want to play tag with the dragon anymore, or how before that Frieren herself was hiding behind a tree after running away from the dragon. It was also funny on multiple levels that when Fern was running away from the dragon, at one point it almost looked like she was flying on a broom like a witch. The reason why that's so funny is because sometimes Fern can be truly scary, like when she kept glaring at Stark, so framing her like a witch was very fitting. And speaking of humor, don't even get me started on the whole spell that allows you to see through clothes and how Fern used that with Stark. That was savage. And it's even funnier if you think about the potential of eventual romance between Fern and Stark. It's not necessary, but I definitely got the vibe like that's possible. Especially when we already have Frieren and Himmel from the old generation, so Fern and Stark could be kind of like a parallel and represent not wasting your time and acting before it's too late. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself and potentially stepping into fanfic territory, so going back to humor, I loved the social commentary on shrinkflation in episode 6. Sure, symbolically, it was about Stark growing up and how that changes perspective. But you will never convince me that at the same time it also wasn't a joke about shrinkflation. It was also funny how Stark said how he spent 3 years in this village, and to him it seemed natural that he would care about its fate after such a long time, while to Frieren that's like a blink of an eye. Fern is already used to that, but Stark, as a new addition to the party, still has quite a few things to learn, and that creates this natural comedy and misunderstandings. I also took a few more notes that are about a bunch of random things. First, I'm wondering if we'll ever encounter a shadow dragon that Stark mentioned when he lied about his scar. Another thing is the hero of the South that was mentioned during a flashback. It could be just a random name to paint a picture that the Demon King's forces are very strong, but things that make it into a story are rarely accidental. So I could also see a situation where maybe this hero didn't actually die and we will meet his older self on our journey, or maybe he did die, but we will meet someone who knew him and someone who will tell his story. It's not really important, but it's just a name that I wrote down in case it comes up again in the future. Another callback that would be cool to see down the line is actually finding a spell that can create syrup and Frieren making shaved ice for everyone. I know it's silly, but that's kind of the point with spells that Frieren collects, and I think it would be a cute scene. Next is that I adored the framing during the departure scene in episode 6, where Stark was standing in Eisen's place, Fern in Heiter's, and Frieren in Himmel's. Frieren continues the trend of creating parallel shots, and I absolutely love it. It also seems that from this point, since we are going north, the journey should get much more dangerous, so I'm excited to see if that will actually be reflected in the plot. And the last note I took is about Frieren. I just love having someone like her as a protagonist. I adored how excited she got when she could finally pick through the dragon's treasure. I know that she has the luxury of time compared to her human companions, but even without that, I love how much she focuses on studying magic and finding new spells because it's her hobby. Not a job, but just a hobby, and yet she treats that hobby like it's her full-time job. And it's very beautiful and inspiring, but I feel like I want to talk about this specific thematic aspect of Frieren at some point in the future, because right now I feel like I don't have a perfect grasp on Frieren as a character yet. So for now, that's all I have about episode 5 and 6. I don't know if I'll go back to talking about each episode separately or if I will combine a few episodes into one review again, so you can comment which one you prefer. But thank you for your time. If you're interested, you can subscribe. Please share what you think in the comments, and hopefully I will see you again in the next review.